All right, today we're diving into one of the most brilliant, controversial, and just absolutely captivating figures in all of history, Napoleon Bonaparte. I mean, this is a man whose ambition literally redrew the map of Europe. But, his story is so much more than just conquest. It's this incredible, dramatic rise, followed by a catastrophic fall. And it all boils down to one huge question. How does a single person come to dominate an entire continent, only to lose it all? I mean, just look at this contrast. It's staggering, right? He starts out as a nobody, really, a minor noble from the island of Corsica, a total outsider, and he ends his life as a prisoner on one of the most remote, isolated islands on the entire planet. So, how did that happen? Let's unpack that incredible journey. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica. And get this, France had only taken over the island 1 year before he was born, so he wasn't really seen as French. He was from a family of minor Italian nobility, and he even spoke French with this thick, noticeable accent. He was, for all intents and purposes, an outsider. But then, history created the absolute perfect storm for a man like him, the French Revolution. The old world of kings and aristocrats was literally being torn down, and in all that chaos, raw talent and pure ambition could shoot you to the top like never before. And for a brilliant young artillery officer, well, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. His first big break came in 1793 at the Siege of Toulon. You had French royalists who had rebelled and handed this super important port over to the British. Napoleon, who was just a captain at the time, looks at the situation and sees a strategic weak point that apparently no one else did. He comes up with his genius plan to seize the high ground, haul his cannons up there, and just rain hellfire down on the British fleet below. It was a masterful use of artillery.
And the result of that one single brilliant move? It was nothing short of astonishing. His plan worked so perfectly that he was promoted straight to brigadier general. And here's the kicker. He was only 24 years old. In one battle, this unknown kid from Corsica becomes a hero of the French Republic.
And his star just kept rising. Only 2 years later, a massive royalist mob is threatening to overthrow the government in Paris. Napoleon is the one called in to defend it. And he doesn't hesitate for a second. He famously orders his men to fire cannons, not over their heads, but directly into the crowd. He called it a whiff of grape shot. It was completely ruthless, brutal even, but it worked. It saved the government and it made him a national icon.
So how do you go from being a ruthless but effective military hero to the absolute ruler of all of France? Well, his victories on the battlefield were becoming the stuff of legend, while the politicians back in Paris were looking weaker and more corrupt by the day.
First, he completely cements his fame with this string of unbelievable victories against Austria in his Italian campaign. Then he goes to Egypt, and yeah, militarily it was kind of a failure. But here's the thing, he gets back to France and he's more popular than ever. He sees his moment, and in 1799, he launches a coup d'etat, a takeover. He just walks in, overthrows the weak government, and basically says, I'm in charge now. He makes himself first consul, the most powerful man in the country.
But by 1804, being first consul just wasn't going to cut it anymore for his level of ambition. He decides to create a brand new French empire, with himself, of course, as the emperor. But he's not going to be crowned like all the kings before him. Oh no, he's going to make a statement, defying centuries of tradition.
Okay, picture this scene. It's his coronation, inside the famous Notre Dame Cathedral. The Pope is there, ready to perform the ceremony. But right at the climactic moment, just as the Pope is about to place the crown on Napoleon's head, Napoleon takes the crown from the Pope's hands and crowns himself. I mean, the sheer audacity. This wasn't just arrogance. It was a powerful symbol. He was declaring to the entire world that his power came from himself, from his own achievements, not from God, not from the church. It was this moment of supreme self-confidence, but also, you can see the seeds of a very dangerous pride. And as emperor, Napoleon hits the absolute peak of his power. He leads his armies in a series of just stunning military campaigns, Austerlitz being the most famous, and he crushes every alliance of European powers that dares to stand against him. He is literally reshaping the continent in his own image. And just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, at its height, around 1811, the French Empire either directly controlled or had influence over 70 million people. You have to go all the way back to the Roman Empire to find that kind of political unification in Europe. It was immense. But here's what's so important to remember. His legacy wasn't just written on the battlefield. You could argue his most lasting achievement was the Napoleonic Code. This was a complete overhaul of the legal system. It got rid of old feudal laws, it guaranteed equality for everyone before the law, and it granted freedom to religious minorities. It was so revolutionary that it's still the basis for legal systems in dozens of countries around the world today. But that same incredible self-belief, the thing that allowed him to take a crown from the Pope and put it on his own head, well, it started to grow into a fatal ambition. Napoleon started to believe he was invincible. And when you believe you're invincible, you start making massive mistakes. One of them would be the beginning of the end. And that mistake, that catastrophic error, was the invasion of Russia in 1812. He was furious that the Russian Tsar was trading with his arch-enemy, Great Britain. So Napoleon put together the largest European army the world had ever seen, the Grande Armée, and he marched east, totally convinced he could just bend the Tsar to his will. The scale of the disaster that followed it's almost hard to comprehend. Look at these numbers. More than 600,000 soldiers marched into Russia with him. Fewer than 100,000, some estimates say way fewer, actually made it back. They weren't just defeated in some big battle. They were destroyed by the brutal Russian winter, by disease, starvation, and constant harassing attacks. His legendary invincible army was completely shattered.
And that catastrophic loss left him totally vulnerable. A new coalition of his enemies, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, they all pounced. They defeated his new, much less experienced army at the huge Battle of Leipzig, and by 1814 they were marching into Paris. Napoleon was forced to give up his throne and was exiled to the tiny island of Elba in the Mediterranean.
Now, for pretty much any other person in history, that would have been the end of the story. But this is Napoleon we're talking about, and his story had one last, absolutely unbelievable chapter left to play. The Eagle, as they called him, was not done yet. So, in February of 1815, he escapes from Elba, lands back in France, and starts marching towards Paris. The French troops that are said to arrest him, they see him and they join him instead. He takes back his throne without firing a single shot, kicking off a period we now call the 100 Days. But all of Europe unites against him one final time, and it all ends with his ultimate, final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo.
This time, his enemies weren't taking any chances. He was exiled to St. Helena, this desolate, volcanic rock of an island in the middle of nowhere in the South Atlantic. And that's where he'd spend the last 6 years of his life, dictating his memoirs, crafting his own legend, before dying in 1821 at just 51 years old.
Which brings us back to the big question, the one historians are still debating. So what was he? Was Napoleon a revolutionary hero who dragged Europe into the modern age with his ideas about law and equality? Or was he a power-hungry tyrant whose ambition just plunged an entire continent into more than a decade of horrific warfare? The truth is, maybe he was both. Maybe the very same qualities that made him a hero were the exact same flaws that turned him into a tyrant. The answer, just like the man himself, remains incredibly and fascinatingly complex.
For more epic history, don't forget to like and subscribe.